All right, let's talk federal benefits. Today, I want to touch on some of the legislation that's being introduced that would cut or eliminate some of the current federal benefits for federal employees. And I want to touch on what's on the list, but I also want to give you some practical examples of how this may impact your situation. So a lot of great info in the video. Stay with me throughout here. But first things first, I want to take a look at the press release. And you can find this too. Here, if we go to oversight.house.gov, you can find the press release here. And there's a meeting slated for April 30th where they're going to walk through some of, it's a markup here for what's on the list. And we can see here what's on the list, a couple things related to the FERS basic annuity. We've got employee contribution requirements. They're talking about raising the contributions for legacy employees. We're talking about eliminating the FERS special retirement supplement. We're talking about changing the calculation from a high 3 to a high 5 for the FERS basic annuity. And then there's some other things on the list here like at-will employment, a filing fee for merit system, and FEHB protections, which would essentially be an audit for who's on your FEHB plan. Some things I was happy not to see on the list, not to mean they're not going to pop up somewhere else, but cost of living adjustments for the FERS basic annuity, I was happy to see that. I really would not like to see those cut, as well as tampering with the G fund. There was some talk about that, changing the interest rate, the G fund within the TSP. So happy to not see those on there. So I want to walk through these, and the first one on the list I do want to take a look at, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the FERS pension, the employee contribution. So we know legacy employees, anyone hired before 2013 contributes 0.8% to the FERS pension, okay, the basic annuity. Anyone hired after 2014 contributes 4.4%. That's a pretty significant increase. What we're talking about here in this legislation is increasing the contribution rate for the legacy employees to match that 4.4%. So essentially what it is a pay cut. We can look at it that way for legacy employees. And the impact, I just want to take a look at this because I think it's important. So I'm going to pull up my spreadsheet here and let's take a look at it, okay? I'm just imagining in this circumstance an employee that's 42 years old and they've got 15 years of service and they're going to MRA at 57, so they've got another 15 to go. Let's just call their salary $150,000 a year. So you can see on my spreadsheet here, that's all laid out for us, okay? 150 grand, and they're currently contributing 0.8%, which amounts to about a $1,200 a year employee contribution. If we increase that all the way up to 4.4% on an annual basis, you're talking about $6,600, okay? And that's in the first year. Now, what I've also done is increased whether or not we continue to get pay raises regularly is another question, but we're operating on that assumption. So 2% pay raise per year for the next 15 years, and that's kind of why you see the salary increase here. And you can see the corresponding contributions increase over that time period as well. Immediately, you can do the quick math. It's 3.6% is the increase, right? And so in the first year, it translates into more than $5,000. That number increases obviously as the contributions go up, but over that 15-year period, here's what's interesting. How much extra does it really cost you? So with the current legacy rate of 0.8%, you would contribute $20,752 to the FERS pension over that time period. In contrast, with the increased contributions, now you're talking about $114,136 in this hypothetical scenario. So, you can apply your numbers and kind of figure out exactly how much of a change it is, but it's going to be significant, all right? So that's kind of what this means, and that's where they're looking for savings, but it really is a pay cut for some legacy employees and can have real impact. Now, it's not changing what you're getting from the FERS pension, so that's a good thing. It's still a super powerful benefit. Even with the 4.4% contribution rate, there's really nothing like this in private industry, so it's a wonderful benefit. We're just talking about a little bit of a change here, which is going to have an impact. Not much you can do to plan around this. It's kind of maybe it's a forced savings mechanism, right? I'd hate to see lowering your contributions somewhere else based on losing this amount of income, the cash flow that's coming through, but we have to make adjustments as they come. So that's a look at what's going on with the contribution rates. So number one on the list. Number two on my list was the FERS special retirement supplement. Now, the FERS special retirement supplement is a wonderful benefit. It's available to those that go out kind of that MRA plus 30 range up until turning age 62. And it's designed to really bridge those gap years until you're eligible for Social Security. So if you retire early at 57, you have something coming in that would kind of mimic what Social Security might give you or something close to it. The benefit stops at age 62. Okay, so MRA plus 30, you can pick it up at 57, 60 and 20, you can pick it up, or if you're a special category employee, then you pick it up when you retire under normal retirement. So to lose this thing could have a significant impact for folks. This is a significant benefit, and this is one to watch. If you are kind of thinking about if you fall into that category of being eligible for this benefit, here's how this thing works. All right, so special retirement supplement is essentially calculated this way. We take our age 62 Social Security estimate times our years of federal service, and then we divide that by the number 40. Okay, and that's, simplified version. OPM probably does it slightly different, but this is kind of what we get. So let's assume your Social Security estimate at age 62 was $2,500. Okay, so that's the number we got here. We got 30 years of service. We're retiring at 57, MRA plus 30, and then we got, our divisor is 40. So if we take that, we do the math on that, it comes out to $1,875 a month. All right, $1,875 a month is $22,500 a year. Okay, so that's kind of what's on the table in terms of the special retirement supplement. It could be a powerful benefit, especially if you fall into that range, retiring 57 to 62, and you're eligible for this thing. Okay, so from a planning perspective, what we may need to do is look at how are we going to make up the difference. So if it's $20,000, $25,000, we need to be diligent about planning for our retirement income, making sure there's enough from other sources, whether it's the FERS pension and then pulling from investments if you're kind of in those gap years until Social Security might kick in. Whether 62 is the right age for Social Security might become a different decision now. So, there's just some variables to plan around there, and it may require increasing contributions, so we're building our nest egg a little bit more to account for that loss of $20,000, $25,000 over those gap years. Okay, those gap years can be a little tricky. All right, so let's move on. Third and final thing on the list for today, we're talking about changing the annuity calculation to include a high 5 average salary versus your high 3. So this is your highest 5 years of pay versus your highest 3 years of pay averaged together to give you, what we need within the annuity calculation. This is gonna have a little bit of an impact. It's not huge, it just depends. So here's how we can think about this. I've created an example for us to look at, and it really depends on the rate of change. Okay, so if you have a relatively small rate of change within those highest 5 years, highest 3 years, the difference is going to be smaller than if you have some big jumps in there. So you might have a big jump with your pay rate based on wild cost of living adjustments like we saw, just recently coming out of COVID with, the big COLAs that we saw, which were great, but we know how fast prices rose. So it was just kind of matching that. Or if you're receiving promotions, grade and step increases, right? So you're bumping up on the GS pay scale and going from a 14 to a maxed out 15, something like that, right? So that's where you'll see the biggest difference. So let's take a look at my example here. And what I've done is I've just created this hypothetical scenario. So we got maxed out GS 15, 3 years from retirement. We're going to say they can have 30 years of service at the end of this time period. And we're just comparing the two. So right here, we can see we're in year number 3, 195.2 is the current salary. The 2 previous years, we had just bumped up by 2.5%. So in the first part of this example, all I'm doing here in these years is illustrating a 2.5% pay increase each year. Okay. So it's just a slow, steady pay increase, 2.5%. This is how the numbers work. So if I take the high 3, which would be the last 3, we can see here on the bottom. So that's 195.2 plus 200,000, 80 plus 205. That gives me a high 3 of $200,120. Okay. Now, if I take the average of those 5 years, it's a little bit lower. It's 195,248. Okay. Now, here's the difference in the calculation. And this is going to be true if your pay increase is the same. Okay. So if your pay increase is 2.5%, if it's 4%, if it's 5%, it's the same each year, the delta is going to equal that pay increase. So take a look at my example here on the bottom. 195 times 30 times 1%. 200 times 30 times 1%. Here's our two annuity amounts. 58,574 is the amount that I get with a high 5 calculation. This is my high 5 and this is my high 3. Okay, so you can see there's, what is that? $1,500 in difference. And that equals, as we see here, a 2.5% decrease in your pension amount between the high 3 and the high 5, matching that pay raise that you're getting on an annual basis. Now, it's a little bit different. We have more of an irregular or dramatic change. And in this circumstance, on the bottom here, I put in a promotion in year 3. So we're 5 years from retirement. You get a promotion in year 3. That puts us right here. So now you're a GS 15 at 3 years out from retirement, making 195.2. We index that for inflation, pay raises 2.5% for the next 2 years. So that gives us here. And then I'm going back. So the previous, maybe they were, I'm just kind of guessing at these numbers a little bit to show you how things change. Maybe they were GS14 somewhere on the scale there. Year 1 and 2 just had a 2.5% pay raise in each of these years. So you can see the difference in the calculation here. So the high 3 comes out to be 200,120, the same as in the top because I'm using those last 3 years. All right, so these 3 right here. But then the high 5 is different because I've got the 2 previous years. I got the first 2 years that were at, the lower grade and step. So I got those 2 previous years that were at the lower pay level incorporated in that. So that changes my high 5 is 189,466. So if I run the numbers the same way I did on the top, that gives me the high 5 calculation 56,840 versus the high 3, which is the same 60,036. That's a 5.6% difference. So you can kind of see the changes there. It's probably not super dramatic unless there's big jumps within your, those 5 years of pay that you'd be looking at. All right, so hope you found that helpful. I mean, there's more that's being proposed for change, and we'll kind of follow what's happening with FEHP because I do think FEHP is one of the most powerful benefits that you have. That in combination with the FERS basic annuity, those are the 2 big ones. So kind of changing things around a little bit does impact some of the planning that we need to do. And if they're, lowering the amount of the agency contribution pre and post retirement for FEHP, that could be a bigger deal that we'll need to work on. So we'll keep an eye on it. If you're working on a retirement plan, you can, maybe the special retirement supplement is the biggest one you'd want to think about here in combination with FEHP, what happens there. Just some variables to work through and plan around. So if you're working on something, you have questions, would love to hear from you. I'd love to be a resource. Please feel free to reach out. If you found value here, please give us a like and a subscribe, and we'll see you next time.